Hello, everyone. I thought I would talk today about cryptozoology. I'm not a zoologist, um, but I have studied zoology in the past. I would come much closer to calling myself a reproductive biologist these days. That's what my research is um, in reproductive ethology mostly, so reproductive behavior. Um, I've spent some time reading about cryptozoology. I used to be very into true crime when I was a little bit younger, um, and so there's considerable crossover there. And I have a lot of critiques of cryptozoology, but I might just start by saying a couple of good things about cryptozoology. There isn't much good to say about cryptozoology, but I will say that it is in line with certain aspects of traditional thinking that I think are very anthropogenic. I think things that are traditionally very human, like storytelling and like mythology, spirituality, those kinds of things I find to be usually positive things. And I would say that cryptozoology sometimes crosses over into the kind of spiritual, mythological aspect of human nature that I actually find quite positive. Now, anyone who knows me will know that I am a pretty huge critic of conspiracy theories, and I see a lot of crossover in the cryptozoology side of things and the conspiracy side of things. I think both of these concepts appeal to people who perhaps fantasizing about finding something new in a world that appears completely discovered, right? So there's a similar kind of psychology going on there with conspiracy theorists, where an aspect of believing in conspiracy theory, which is itself a pseudoscience, is it kind of makes you feel good because it makes you feel like you're on the side of those who know, as opposed to those who don't. You know, it makes you feel like you're somebody who's uh, critical of injustice, and so I find those to be similar psychologies, although I think that conspiracy theorism might be a little bit more venomous sometimes than cryptozoology. Because the worst that cryptozoologists do, I think, is look for Bigfoot. I mean, that's the most ridiculous of the cryptids, and that's probably the worst that a cryptozoologist can do. The worst that a conspiracy theorist can do, as we've seen, is white supremacy and those kinds of things. Those are conspiracy theories. So I don't equate them in terms of severity, but I do equate them in terms of psychology, if that makes sense. In 1955, a book was published called On the Track of Unknown Animals, and since then there's been relatively huge public interest in cryptids. Still, these are kind of small sects of the internet and of public life. Um, but they're big enough that certainly most people know about them. You know, tours of the Loch Ness, and tours of um, areas in California where Bigfoot may have been seen. Those kinds of things. You know. Now, one of the things that cryptozoologists like to talk about is they like to talk about paracryptozoology, or they like to talk about forms of cryptozoology that aren't as ridiculous as looking for unicorns or Bigfoot or sea creatures. There's certainly a bias in cryptozoology in searching for cryptic hominids like Bigfoot, or cryptic sea monsters like Loch Ness, or um, like the kraken or something like that, although giant and colossal squid do exist. Um, but you see this all the time if you go anywhere near the cryptozoology subreddit. People will talk about how cryptozoology is not anti-science, and actually they don't believe in things like Bigfoot, but what they do believe in is smaller animals, animals that may potentially exist but not have sort of huge global impact, like the discovery of Bigfoot or something like that. And my critique of that is that wouldn't these people then want to be entomologists? Um, I think in almost every area of zoology, we find uh, groups of scientists or scientists who believe in animals that haven't yet been discovered. There was a new monkey recently discovered in Congo, and entomologists hold space in their field for the discovery of new insects all the time. Um, so why do these people then go and associate with the label of cryptozoology instead of aligning themselves with the label of zoology? I mean, these people are on the subreddit of cryptozoology. And I think it's because they like the search or they like the hunt more than they actually like the science itself, because it's not a science. At best, we could call it a transitional field of research. This is what Elise Sembry says in her really good article that I have here called Cryptozoology as a Pseudoscience Beasts in Transition. And she defines a pseudoscience as a field that tries to appropriate the prestige of science and copies its outward trappings and protocols, but essentially falls short of meeting the accepted standards of the practice of science. Now, she actually has a really, really interesting idea about cryptozoology. One that I don't know if I don't suppose that she founded this idea, but it's the concept that cryptozoology kind of lacks viability, not because it can't be proven right, but because it can't be proven wrong. Science requires falsifiability, and if you're in this never-ending search for elusive creatures, as she says, there's never going to be any evidence that can be proven false. And it's a similar thing with conspiracy theorists, right? If you've ever tried to speak to a conspiracy theorist and kind of talk them out of their conspiracy, they're going to say, "Oh, it's controlled opposition, blah blah blah." You know, as if you're a part then of the conspiracy, of you've been brainwashed. So it's not the same with cryptozoology, but it's similar in that the claims of cryptozoologists lack falsifiability, right? There's no evidence that can be deemed false, proven false. There's no hypothesis that can be proven false because there just isn't enough evidence to do that. And that means it's not a science. Now, in a way, as I do with conspiracy theorists, I feel a little bit sorry for cryptozoologists because they do attract a huge amount of ridicule, and I don't want to be ridiculing them in the same way that others have. As I've said, I think there is a traditional aspect to their thought process that is not admirable, but understandable. And likewise, there are low-stakes cryptids, as there are low-stakes conspiracies. A low-stakes conspiracy would be something like, I don't know, the streamer flight reacts as a secret genius who graduated from Harvard. And a low-stakes cryptid would be, I mean, I think Bigfoot is a low-stakes cryptid. But the problem is that the way of thinking that conspiracy theorists have will eventually, I believe, evolve into, Rothschild banking cabal, they're eating babies and, that kind of stuff. I think likewise with cryptids, the insistence on defending pseudoscience is itself a very dangerous concept, because even if you do believe in cryptids, you believe a very vulnerable group of extremely cryptic animals is now being threatened by, would now be, if they existed, be being threatened by climate change, deforestation, destruction of habitat. So if many of these people are anti-science, right, they believe in pseudoscience, I wonder what the general consensus among cryptid believers is on things like climate change and how they believe climate change might be affecting their favorite cryptids. Are they in favor then of scientists moving into areas where these cryptids hide and searching for them properly? Are they in favor of, expansion of human settlement into these areas so we can find them? I'm interested in that, and I know that there is a very broad definition of what it means to be a cryptozoologist, and there are kind of indigenous perspectives on it. Again, those fall into the traditionalist aspect of this way of thinking that I do think is understandable, and I do think is valuable for like sociologists to study. But if the cryptozoologist's definition of cryptozoology is that it is a science and it's a transitional field of study, then they should become entomologists. I fully encourage them to become entomologists because you are discovering cryptids, by the dozens, probably every year. Let me look up the stats on this. How many new bugs are discovered every year? Let's have a look. This is from University of Arizona News. Among the approximately 16,000 new species described every year, roughly 6,000 are insects. That is without the AI overview, of course. Yeah, really, really fascinating stuff. So I encourage all the cryptozoologists out there to become entomologists, because there's 6,000 cryptids discovered every single year. So I really do wonder why that's the case. But maybe it's the same reason as to why conspiracy theorists aren't becoming sociologists or historians. All right, that's about all I have to say on cryptids for now. I'll link the Shembri article in the description, and I encourage any discussions you want to have. I'm really interested in conversations around cryptozoology, and I would like to encourage cryptozoologists, like I said, to move into actual fields of science, and then or then take their interest in transitional science into those areas of legitimate science, so that they can actually become, because final thing. I do admire the obsession that these people have, or a lot of them have, with the idea of a cryptid. And I think that we could use that kind of obsessive work ethic in science, especially as kind of academia is becoming more individualistic. We could use people who are interested in uniting as a community on a fixed goal. That is actually something that academia desperately needs. That's all. Thanks.